Hi everyone, so today I'm going to be talking about orthopedic impairments in children in schools. So first and foremost, it's really important to know all the laws that go into special education. So one really important one is the IDEA, which is Individuals with Disability Education Act. It allows free and appropriate education and equity in schools for students that are disabled. It also makes sure that those students get service that are relative to what they need. There are two parts that are really specific. So for orthopedic impairment especially, Part B is for ages 3 to 21, and that's for students that are in the school systems to make sure that they get the accommodations that they need. And also there's early intervention for children that are birth to 2 years old. So they're not technically in schools quite yet, but they do need services as well. So services like early intervention can go into the home to help children be ready for school that may be disabled. So just some background on orthopedic impairment. It is considered a severe orthopedic impairment that adversely affects a child's educational performance. So it can be anything orthopedic that could influence how a child would perform academically. It does include impairments caused by congenital abnormalities, which could be clubfoot or an absence of extremities or digits. It could also be impairments from disease like bone tuberculosis, and it could also be impairments from other things like cerebral palsy, spinal bifida, burns, fractures, and even amputations. So if you look at these three photos, the one all the way on this side is a child with clubfoot. The one in the middle is a child that has an amputated arm, and then the one all the way to the side is a child with cerebral palsy in the wheelchair. So just some defining features. Orthopedic impairment is broken up into three different categories. So the first one is neuromotor impairments, the next one is degenerative diseases, and the last one is musculoskeletal disorders. So neuromotor impairments. The first one I'm going to talk about is cerebral palsy. So it's a non-progressive disorder that usually has voluntary movements that don't really make too much sense. It is caused by damage to the developing brain, so it usually happens before birth or within the first few years of a child's life. The movements are typically uncoordinated, really not appropriate for situations, and they're just kind of abnormal. There are four common types of cerebral palsy. The first one is spastic, so that's very tight muscles, kind of calls for uncoordinated movements and also really tight body stiffness. The next one is altoid, which is movements that are usually abnormal and purposeless. So again, they're not really appropriate for what's going on. The next one is ataxic, which has poor balance or uncoordinated voluntary movements. So children that have cerebral palsy that are ataxic really have not great balance. And then also there's mixed. So it could be any of these combined together. Sometimes you do see them on their own, but also you can see them combined as well. So next, with neuromotor impairments, the next I'm going to talk about is spina bifida. So spina bifida happens in the spinal cord, and it's usually an abnormal opening in the spinal cord, which could cause for tons of defects. It can involve paralysis as well, and it usually does not affect intellectual functioning. So it's typically only physical, not mental. So there are quite a few children that do suffer from spinal bifida, but usually they have great brain functioning. So next is degenerative diseases. So these also affect motor development. They are the most popular one when it comes to orthopedic impairment. Something really popular that is talked about when it comes to degenerative diseases is muscular dystrophy. So that is caused from muscle fibers not doing their job and not working properly, and that in turn affects the muscles, which then in turn affects the body. So whenever someone is talking about orthopedic impairment and it's degenerative diseases, it's most likely muscular dystrophy as well. Next is musculoskeletal diseases. So these can affect different levels of physical limitations. There are two things that are really talked about when you talk about musculoskeletal diseases. The first one is juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. So sometimes we think about rheumatoid arthritis and usually we think of people that may be a little bit older, have weaker joints, things like that, but there is such a thing called juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and that is in children that are 16 or younger, and it lasts more than 6 weeks. So if their symptoms are lasting more than 6 weeks, they have really bad joint inflammation and stiffness. As long as it's over that 6-week mark, it's considered juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. The next one is limb deficiency, and that can mean anything from they're missing a finger to they're missing an arm. It's anything where they're missing a limb or an extremity, and it affects their physical well-being. Next is incidence and prevalence. So right now there are about 5.9 million students that receive special education services in the United States, and about 1.1 of those students receive disability services for orthopedic impairment specifically. So it's really a small percentage, but it is still a percentage of students, and it equals to about 68,000 students. In New Jersey specifically, in 2016, there were 347 students that received services for being orthopedically impaired. So on this slide right here, it talks about North Carolina, specifically in 2013. So this kind of just proves that there is no specific race that is affected by orthopedic impairment. There are some that are more than others, but they do also all have children that are orthopedically impaired. So the ones that are on the lower side are biracial students, which was 8. Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, which actually had nothing. Asian, Native American, which had about 1 to 3 apiece. So the ones that you see a little bit higher are Black or African American, which had 20, Hispanic or Latino had 23, and whites had 87. So again, this was in North Carolina in 2013. So it just goes to show that it's really not different races that have it. There are some cases besides Hawaiian or Pacific Islander that did have students in it. There are some that are more than other, however. Okay, so for education, learning is obviously the most important thing, but knowing different things about these diseases that cause orthopedic impairments is also really important. So just because 2 students have an orthopedic impairment and they both may be missing their left hand does not mean that they need the same accommodations. Everything needs to be individualized, and everything needs to be for that student and what is going to get them the best education that they can. Some students that do, or most students that do have orthopedic impairments typically don't have cognitive issues, or they don't have issues with language or sensory issues. It's usually just physical. So students that do have neuromotor impairments do have a higher incidence rates of having additional impairments because of the brain activity that goes into it. So sometimes if it just affects the spine, it may also go to the brain, or if it has to do with the brain development, it could really affect other impairments or cause other impairments as well. Learning is so important. So it's really important that students have the accommodations that they need to get the best education that they can. So different teaching strategies. It's really important that students are comfortable in the classroom, although they are orthopedically impaired. So there are a lot of individual needs when it comes to orthopedic impairments. Students should always be incorporated into general education unless there is a brain abnormality where they have other impairments as well. But other than that, they should always be included in the general education. There's also certain things that classroom teachers can do, and there are things like seating arrangements, working on communication devices, or just making sure that they have the awareness of the disease or of the impairment that their student may have. Even though they haven't worked with a student like that before, it's really important that they have the education, that they are knowledgeable on the student that they're working with. And also there are other things in schools that students can gain access to that can help them, especially if they're orthopedically impaired, and that could be occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech language pathologists, and also adaptive PE. So adaptive PE is really, really important when it comes to students that are orthopedically impaired. They should still be able to get the same physical activity as others. It just needs to be altered to what they can do. So having an adaptive PE teacher or an adaptive PE option is really, really important, because there's no reason why they can't do PE just because they're orthopedically impaired. There are ways around it, and there are ways that they can still feel comfortable and get physical exercise at the same time. So as far as assistive technology in the classroom, it's really important that students that are orthopedically impaired have the things that they need, and it comes with everything. So technology doesn't always have to just be like electronic or something like that. It could be something totally different, something that's made. So something that does work with students that are orthopedically impaired, if they have communication boards, or they need something where maybe they can't write, or they need like to touch something or anything like that. Things like that are really important and can really benefit them as well. And also things like having the proper canes, walkers, crutches, wheelchairs, seating, desks, tables. Maybe they have to have differentiated seating. Things like that are really, really important to their educational needs in the classroom. And it's really, really important that they have things like that so that they're comfortable while learning too. Because even though they do have an orthopedic impairment, if they are in the general education, they need to be comfortable and need to have the same opportunities that every other student has. So So that concludes my presentation. I hope you learned something about orthopedic impairments, something that's really close to my heart, and it was really important to me to research more, to learn more for myself and for my future students. So thank you for watching.